My name is Madison Sinclair Hale. I am 29 years old. And I found out what my parents really thought of me on the front porch of the 3-bedroom raised ranch I had grown up in. On a Tuesday night in late October of 2017, while a sleet storm hardened to ice on the rural Minnesota highway behind me and my 1-year-old twins, Caleb and Hannah sat strapped into a 2008 Honda Odyssey in the driveway with the engine running and the heater on its lowest setting because my fuel gauge was sitting at 1/8 and I did not know yet where I was going to spend the night. I had been a widow for 4 days. My husband, Daniel Hale, 23 years old, had died on a Friday afternoon in mid-October in a tractor rollover on a small leased dairy farm outside Maple Plain, Minnesota, where he had been working as a farmhand and where the two of us, along with our infant twins, had been living in a converted farmhand cottage rent-free as part of his compensation. The tractor had been a 1981 John Deere that the dairy owner had been told to replace 3 years earlier by his own farm equipment dealer. The dairy owner had not replaced it. Daniel had been driving it down a graded slope to a hay barn at 4:11 on a Friday afternoon when the left rear wheel had caught a hidden frost heave and the tractor had pitched. He had been thrown clear at first. The tractor had landed on him on the second roll. He had died at the scene. He had been 23 years and 4 months old. He had not been wearing a seatbelt because the seatbelt on the 1981 John Deere had not worked since 2014. The county sheriff arrived at our cottage at 4:47 p.m. with a chaplain from the local Lutheran church. I was nursing Hannah on the living room couch when the knock came. I had been about to start dinner. Daniel had been due home at 5. By Monday morning of the following week, my life had been disassembled with the efficiency of a procedure that had been rehearsed by other people, without my knowledge. The dairy owner's lawyer called me at 9 a.m. on Monday to inform me that, since the rental cottage was tied to Daniel's employment, and Daniel was no longer employed, I would need to vacate the property within 14 days. The bank that held our joint checking account froze the account on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. pending probate. The credit union that held our small savings $2,411, which had been Daniel's parents' wedding gift 2 years before, would not release the funds without the death certificate, which the county clerk had told me would not be issued for at least 6 weeks. Daniel's life insurance policy, a small-term policy through a regional agent in Brainerd that paid out $40,000 on accidental death, had been opened to a 30-day review process because farm equipment accidents are reviewed on a case-by-case basis to ensure the policy was in force at the time of loss. The $40,000 would not land in any account I had access to for 60 to 90 days at the earliest. I had $41 in cash in the front pocket of my jeans on the Tuesday afternoon. I packed a Honda Odyssey full of 2 car seats, 6 diapers per child per day for a week, 4 bottles, the formula canister, a single small duffel bag of clothes, my wedding photograph, and the file folder containing my marriage certificate and the twins' birth certificates and the death certificate request form. I left almost everything else in the cottage. I drove 43 miles east on rural Minnesota highways in a sleet storm with my 1-year-old twins in the back seat. Because my mother lived in a brick ranch in a subdivision outside Eden Prairie, and she was the only person I could think to drive to. I was 21 years old. I had been a Sinclair daughter for 21 years. I had never asked my mother for help, in any meaningful sense. In my entire adult life, I had not needed to. Daniel had been the one I had run to since I was 17. I want to tell you what my mother said on the porch. I want to tell you what my older brother Keith said, leaning against the doorframe with one hand on his hip. I want to tell you what my father did, which was nothing, because he never did anything. And I want to tell you what I did, because I want you to understand that I did not raise my voice and I did not cry and I did not knock a second time. I drove away with 2 one-year-olds in the back seat and $41 in my pocket and a quarter tank of gasoline. and I let my family of origin recede into the rearview mirror of a 2008 Honda Odyssey while my children slept. Then I drove 63 additional miles north on the same highway, because there was a name and a phone number and an address on a small business card I had found in the glove box of Daniel's truck the morning after he died. And that name was the only other adult in the state of Minnesota I could think to ask for shelter. 8 years later, at the largest small business acquisition, signing the rural counties of eastern Minnesota, had ever seen held under a 130-year-old white oak on the same ranch where my children had taken their first steady steps as toddlers, I stood at a wooden podium beside an attorney from a Twin Cities corporate firm. And I distributed $80 million in front of 300 guests, including the woman who had told me on her porch that she was done raising children. What I did with that $80 million made the local paper. What I said about my mother before I signed the distribution paperwork made the regional news. What happened to my family of origin in the next 6 months made it clear that whatever else my mother had been doing with the 8 years she had not been mothering me, she had not been preparing for the day she would be standing in a ranch yard in front of a Twin Cities legal team, listening to her oldest daughter explain why every cent of the proceeds was already accounted for. Welcome to Quiet Reckoning, the channel where dependable people finally close the account. If someone in your life has ever met you on a porch, in the worst week of your life, and chosen to be on the wrong side of the door, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me the name of the first stranger who opened a door for you when family closed one. And subscribe, because the part where I read the distribution from a wooden podium under a white oak in front of 300 people is the part you will remember. I want to tell you about the porch first. You should know who I was at 21. I had grown up the second of 3 children in a quiet, ungentle household. My father, Wesley Sinclair, had been a regional sales manager for an industrial paint distributor in Bloomington for 28 years. He had retired at 58 with a small pension and a mortgage paid off. My mother, Eleanor, had worked as the office manager of a private orthodontics practice in Eden Prairie from the time I was 3 until the time I was 15, at which point she had retired to focus on the family, which had in practice meant retiring to focus on my older brother Keith. My older brother Keith was the planned one, the firstborn son, the one for whom my mother kept a leather-bound photo album with 3 engraved monograms on the cover. I was the middle child, the daughter, born 3 years after Keith, in a year my mother had told me, at 14, had been the year your father and I were finally getting comfortable. My younger sister Hadley was the surprise, born 6 years after me, and she had become my mother's favorite by the time she was 4, which my mother had not bothered to conceal at any family event since 2008. I had been the responsible one, the one who had walked Hadley to the kindergarten bus at 6 in the morning because Mom was not a morning person. The one who had cooked the family Thanksgiving dinner at age 15 because Mom had a migraine. The one who had paid Hadley's overdue library fines at 17 out of my own babysitting money because Hadley had stolen them and my mother had not noticed. I had met Daniel Hale at a 4-H district barbecue in the summer before my senior year of high school. He had been a year ahead of me. He had been quiet and tall, with hands that already looked like a working man's hands at 17. And he had been raised on a small dairy operation outside Brainerd by parents who had both died of separate cancers within 14 months of each other when he was 20. By the time I met him, he had inherited a quarter section of land outside Brainerd, a beat-up Chevrolet truck, and $3,000 in cash. And he had been alone in the world for 1 year and 4 months. We had been together 2 years before we married. We had married very quietly, in a small ceremony at a county courthouse 2 weeks after my 19th birthday. My mother had not attended. She had told me, on the phone the morning of, that she had a headache and would not be able to make the drive into the city. I had not held it against her at the time. I had held it against her since. The twins had been born 13 months after the wedding, 11 weeks premature. On a Sunday in late September of 2016, they had been in the neonatal intensive care unit at North Memorial in Robbinsdale for 34 days. My mother had visited once, on day 26, for 45 minutes, during which she had told me that I should have waited to have children because Daniel's career was not yet established. Daniel had been working 110 hours a week between 2 farmhand jobs and the small leased dairy operation we had taken on the previous spring. The twins came home on Halloween of 2016. Daniel died 11 months later. I pulled into my parents' driveway in Eden Prairie at 9:47 p.m. On the Tuesday after Daniel's funeral, the porch light was on. The kitchen light was on. The blue glow of the living room television was visible through the picture window. I left the twins asleep in their car seats, with the engine running. I walked up the front path. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened the front door 11 seconds later. She had been waiting. She had seen the headlights pull in. She was wearing a soft pink cardigan and the small gold cross necklace she only wore for church and serious occasions. She had styled her hair. She had set the stage, behind her, in the living room. My older brother Keith was leaning against the doorframe to the kitchen with a beer in his right hand. He was 31. He had been living in the basement bedroom of my parents' house for the previous 18 months because his most recent real estate flip in St. Cloud had collapsed and he had moved home. He smirked at me. My father was in his armchair facing the television. He had not turned. He had not looked at me. He had not stood up. The Vikings were playing the Bears on Monday Night Football. They had played the night before. He was watching the recording. My mother said, "Madison, honey, come in. You look terrible. Sit on the bench. I will make you some tea." I told her I did not want tea. I told her, in 7 sentences, that Daniel had died on Friday, that his accounts were frozen, that the cottage was being repossessed in 12 days, that the life insurance check was 60 to 90 days out, that I had $41 in my pocket, that I did not need money, that I needed the couch in the den for 3 weeks, and a corner of the kitchen counter for the twins' formula warmer, until the check landed and I could get back on my feet. My mother's face did the small involuntary thing faces do when a request lands they had been hoping not to receive. The pink cardigan did not move. The gold cross did not move. Her mouth did the work. "Madison," she said, "I am so sorry about Daniel. We are all so sorry. He was a wonderful young man. The wonderful young man whose wedding she had skipped. But honey, your father and I have just hit the part of our lives where we get to enjoy our own space. The house is finally how we like it. Keith is in the basement getting back on his feet. Hadley is in graduate school. We are done. I have done my raising. The babies are precious. Sweetheart. But 2 one-year-old babies in this house for 3 weeks it would not be fair to your father. He has worked his whole life for this quiet. You chose a different life. You chose to marry a farmer at 19. Against our advice. You chose to have twins before Daniel had a real career. You knew what you were choosing. I am so sorry. Sweet pea. But I have done my raising. I cannot keep rescuing you from the choices you made." I did not speak. Keith, from the kitchen doorframe, said, "You always were dramatic. Mads, you'll figure it out. You always do." My father, in the armchair, made a small sound that might have been a clearing of the throat or might have been a small grunt at a missed tackle on the screen. He did not turn. He did not stand up. He did not say a word. The porch light flickered. My mother said, "Have you tried Daniel's family?" Daniel's family had been a mother and a father, both deceased, and one brother in the Marines stationed in Okinawa. My mother knew this. She had known this for 4 years. She said it anyway. I looked at her. I looked at my brother. I looked at the side of my father's head. I said, very quietly, "All right. Mom. Good night." I turned around. I walked back down the front path. The porch light, on a motion sensor timer my father had installed in 2014, clicked off as I reached the driveway, and the front yard went into full darkness. I sat in the driver's seat of the Odyssey. The twins were still asleep. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I did not cry. I want you to understand that everyone expects the widow with the dead husband and the frozen accounts and the $41 to fall apart on her mother's driveway in a sleet storm. I did not. I felt a strange flat clarity. The way the line in a balance sheet finally resolves when the loss column is fully accepted. I opened the glove compartment of the Odyssey. I had been driving Daniel's truck for the year and a half since the twins had come home. Because the truck had the extended cab and could fit 2 car seats, the Odyssey had been Daniel's town vehicle. His small concession to my preference for carrying groceries in something that did not smell like silage. The glove compartment held the owner's manual, the registration, a small Ziploc bag of crayon stubs, and a thin stack of business cards Daniel had been collecting from agriculture professionals in our region for the previous 3 years. I went through the stack. Most of them were veterinarians, equipment dealers, hay brokers, large animal supply reps. I stopped at the 7th card. The card was a creamy off-white with hand-pressed embossed brown lettering. It read, Walton and Ruth Whitford, Whitford Springs Equine Ranch, Therapeutic Equine Programs, Cottage Grove Area, Minnesota. In Daniel's handwriting on the back, in pencil, good people. Owedunha. 1. Walton said any time. Daniel had not told me about Walton and Ruth. Daniel had not had time. Daniel had been working 110 hours a week. I did not know who Whitford Springs was, or what Walton owed Daniel for, or why a man Daniel had referred to as Dan H. Daniel had not used a middle initial in his life, had needed a favor returned from a quiet farmhand in Maple Plain at some point in the previous 3 years. I knew only what the back of the card said. Anytime. I dialed the number. It was 10:15 p.m. The phone rang 4 times. A woman's voice came on, soft and slow and not surprised. "This is Ruth Whitford," I said. "Mrs. Whitford. My name is Madison Hale. I am Daniel Hale's wife. Daniel died on Friday. I have his card from your glove box. I am sitting in a driveway in Eden Prairie with my 1-year-old twins. I do not know what Daniel did for your husband. I do not know if it matters anymore. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. I am sorry to be calling this late." The line was silent for 3 seconds. Then Ruth Whitford said, "Sweetheart, drive to us. Right now." The driveway is the 3rd gate on the left after the white silo on County Road 19. The porch light is on. I will put the kettle on. Drive carefully. The roads are bad. We will be up. I drove 63 miles south and east, through the slowing sleet. On rural highways I had never driven before. With my twins asleep in the back seat and the Whitford Springs card on the dashboard, I arrived at a long gravel drive at 1:57 a.m. On Wednesday morning. The porch light was on. A small farmhouse glowed yellow at the end of the drive. 2 figures were waiting on the porch, an older man in a Carhartt jacket and a wool cap, an older woman in a long brown wool coat over what looked like a flannel nightgown. The woman crossed the gravel before I had stopped the engine. She opened the passenger side back door. She unbuckled Hannah's car seat with the efficiency of a person who had unbuckled hundreds of car seats. She lifted Hannah, sleeping, against her shoulder. And she said over her shoulder to me, through the open back door, "Honey, Walton is going to get the boy. You sit. Catch your breath. We have a room. Welcome home. I had heard the words, welcome home 3 times in my 21 years on this earth. The first time had been from Daniel at the courthouse the day we married. The second time had been from Daniel at the front door of the dairy cottage the day we moved in. The third time had just been said to me at 1:58 a.m. on a Wednesday in late October of 2017 by a woman I had never met before in my life, who was carrying my 1-year-old daughter into a strange farmhouse in a brown wool coat on a porch in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. I did not know yet that night that Ruth Whitford was 68 years old, that she had been a labor and delivery nurse for 41 years before she had retired in 2013, that she and her husband Walton had been married for 44 years, that they had buried 2 infant sons in 1979 and 1982 and had never had another child, that the favor Daniel Hale had done for Walton 3 winters earlier had been to ride out alone to their ranch during a January blizzard to help Walton deliver a high-risk foal whose mother had been in distress and whose veterinarian could not reach the property due to the storm, that Daniel had spent 11 hours on the floor of their birthing stall with Walton in temperatures of -21, helping save a mare and a foal, and had refused the $800 Walton had offered him for it the next morning. I did not know yet that Ruth had been telling Walton every year since that the Hale boy is going to need us one day, and that Walton had been waiting for the phone call I had just made for 33 months. I did not know yet that the small foal Daniel had helped deliver in January of 2015 was a chestnut mare named June, that June had given birth in March of the previous year to a small foal named Juniper, that Juniper had been born with a congenital deformity of the right hind leg that 2 regional equine veterinarians had recommended euthanasia for, that Walton had refused to put Juniper down, that Walton had been quietly going broke, trying to keep Juniper alive on a regimen of custom-fabricated braces the local farrier could not get right, and that there was, in the back of Daniel's tool chest in the farmhand cottage in Maple Plain, the tool chest I had left behind at midnight on Tuesday because I had not thought to bring it the first prototype of an adjustable equine leg brace that Daniel had been quietly designing in his off hours for the previous 14 months. After he had heard Walton talking about Juniper at the regional dairy auction in March, I did not know any of that yet. I would learn it, piece by piece, over the next 8 years, what I knew at 1:59 a.m. on that Wednesday in late October of 2017 was that a stranger in a brown wool coat had just said welcome home to my daughter on a porch in Cottage Grove, Minnesota, and that I had $41 in my pocket and 2 one-year-olds and no plan beyond the next 24 hours. And that for the first time since the county sheriff had knocked on my cottage door at 4:47 on a Friday afternoon 5 days earlier, I felt the very small possibility that the next 24 hours might actually be survivable. Walton walked across the gravel to my open driver's side door. He took off his wool cap. He looked at me. He had clear, gray, calm eyes. He said, "Mrs. Haile, Daniel was a good man. We have been waiting for you. Come inside." Daughter. I went inside. The first thing Ruth Whitford did, after she carried Hannah inside and laid her down on a quilt on the living room couch, was set a kettle on the stove and pour Walton a cup of black coffee and pour me a mug of warm milk with honey. Because she said warm milk was the only thing she had ever known to settle a woman who had been driving through a sleet storm with 2 infants on no sleep. She handed me the mug. I drank it. Walton sat across from me, at the small oak kitchen table. He did not ask me questions. He let me set the pace. After about 10 minutes, when I had stopped shaking, he said quietly, "Madison, I have a small room above the stables. Daniel helped me put up the drywall in 2016. He never came back to see it finished. There is a queen bed, a bathroom with a shower, a small kitchenette. It is not luxury. It is warm. It is yours for as long as you need it. We are not going to charge you anything. We are not going to ask you to work it off. We had a place. You needed one. That is the whole transaction. Do you understand? I told him I understood. Ruth carried Caleb upstairs first. Then Hannah. The room was 11 feet by 14 feet, with a sloped ceiling that followed the roofline of the stable, a double-pane window that looked out over the paddock, and 2 small portable cribs Ruth had set up in the previous 20 minutes while Walton had been talking to me. They had been holding the cribs for 33 months. The cribs were dusty in a way that told me they had been the cribs the Whitfords had bought in 1979, in the month before their first son was born and the month before he had not lived to come home. Ruth would tell me, 3 years later, that the cribs had been in storage since 1982 and that they had been keeping them because you never know who is going to need a clean place to put a sleeping child. I slept 7 hours and 40 minutes. The longest stretch of sleep I had gotten in 4 days. I came down the next morning at 9:15. Ruth was at the stove making French toast. Walton was at the table reading the Pioneer Press. He set the paper down when I came in. He said, "Madison, there is no rush. There is no plan today except eat the breakfast and then go look at the horses. You can decide later what comes next." I looked at the horses. I met June. The chestnut mare Daniel had helped deliver in the blizzard of January 2015. June was 9 that morning. She nuzzled my forearm through the stall bars the way a dog might. Then Walton walked me 4 stalls down. He opened the half door. He said, "Madison, this is Juniper." Juniper was a small chestnut yearling with a white star on her forehead and a right hind leg that turned 22 degrees inward at the hock joint. She was wearing a clumsy custom brace the local farrier had made from leather and aluminum bar stock. The brace had not been working. Juniper was favoring the leg so badly that the muscle on her right hindquarter had atrophied to roughly 2/3 the mass of the left. Walton looked at me. 2 vets have told me to put her down. I have not been able to. I am going broke trying to keep her standing. The farrier means well, but he is not an orthopedic engineer. I do not know what I am doing. I am 68 years old and I am about to lose this filly. I tell you this because I want you to know who lives here. I am not asking you for anything. I asked him if I could go back to the farmhand cottage in Maple Plain to retrieve the things I had left behind. Walton said, "I will drive you tomorrow. We will take my truck." The next morning, we drove the 43 miles back to the cottage. I had 11 days before the dairy owner had said he would take possession. The cottage was exactly as I had left it. I packed what I could fit into Walton's truck bed. The last thing I retrieved. From the back of Daniel's tool chest in the small outbuilding behind the cottage was a worn black canvas bag I had never opened before. It had been in the corner of the tool chest for 14 months. I knew it had been there because Daniel had moved it once. The previous April, when I had been looking for a pair of pruning shears and had asked him to dig through the chest, I had not asked him then what was in the bag. He had told me, vaguely, that it was a side project. I had not pressed. He had been a private craftsman about side projects. He had wanted to show me when they were ready. I opened the bag on the tailgate of Walton's truck in the cottage driveway. Inside the bag was a fully fabricated adjustable equine leg brace, hand-built from aircraft-grade aluminum and medical-grade polymer padding. The brace had an articulating hinge at the hock joint, 3 independent tension straps, and a small printed label on the inner cuff that read, in Daniel's careful block lettering, Prototype 3 for Juniper D. Haile. Feb 2017. I sat down on the tailgate. I held the brace in my hands. Daniel had been working on this for 14 months. He had not told me. He had told Walton, the previous March at the regional dairy auction, that he had been thinking about Juniper's leg. And Walton had not pressed him. Daniel had built 3 prototypes in his off hours. He had been planning. I would learn over the next year of conversations with Walton. To bring the third prototype to Whitford Springs in the spring of 2018. When the weather had warmed enough to fit it on Juniper without freezing the polymer cuff to her leg, Daniel had died 11 months early. I drove back to Whitford Springs that afternoon with the brace in the truck cab between me and Walton. I did not say anything for the whole hour. Walton did not press me. When we pulled into the gravel drive, I said, "Walton, can we try the brace on Juniper today?" Walton stopped the truck. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Madison, I have been waiting for that brace for 33 months. Daniel told me he was working on something. He did not tell me how far along he was. I am going to ask you something now that I want you to answer honestly. Do you know how to fit a brace on a yearling?" I told him I did not. I told him I had grown up around livestock. My father's family had run a small beef operation outside Owatonna until my grandfather sold it in 1998, and I had spent every summer of my teenage years on that operation. I had assisted with calving and basic large animal care for 11 years. I had never fitted a brace. But I had set splints on calves and read enough animal anatomy textbooks during long winters in our farmhand cottage that I knew what the hock joint was supposed to look like. Walton said, "Then we are going to learn together. I have a veterinarian in Stillwater who has known me for 19 years. I am going to call him tonight. He is going to come out tomorrow. We are going to fit Daniel's brace under his supervision. If it does not work, we will adjust. If it works, we will keep going. I am not putting that filly down." The veterinarian was a man named Dr. Papo, Teo Park, 54 years old, who had been the large animal vet for the eastern half of Washington County for the previous 23 years. He arrived at Whitford Springs at 10 the next morning. He looked at the brace for a long time. He turned it over in his hands. He said, very quietly, "Walton." "Who built this?" Walton said. "Daniel Hale." Theo Park said, "Walton, whoever built this brace understood the biomechanics of a hock joint at a level I have not seen in 23 years of practice. The articulating hinge is not catalog. This was custom machined. The polymer cuff has a load distribution channel. I would have to look up in a textbook to name. Where is Mr. Hale?" Walton said. "He passed on Friday." Theo Park took off his glasses. He polished them on his shirt. He put them back on. He said, "Then we are going to honor the work. Let us fit this on the filly." We fitted the brace on Juniper that morning. It took 3 hours. The polymer cuff had to be heat-formed to her exact leg measurements. The articulating hinge had to be tensioned. Theo Park guided me through every step. By 11 that night, when the brace had been on for 12 hours, Juniper was standing with weight distributed across both hindquarters for the first time since she had been 6 months old. By the end of the second week, the atrophy in her right hindquarter had begun to reverse. By the end of the second month, Juniper was walking without a noticeable favor. By the end of the first year, she was running. I want to skip forward, because the next 7 years are where the company was built. And most of what was built quietly. Daniel had not been planning to start a company. Daniel had been planning to give Walton a brace for one filly. The company came afterward, and the company came because of 3 people, only one of whom had been Daniel. The second was Walton, who, 6 weeks into Juniper's recovery, told me that he had 4 other ranchers in the region who had foals or yearlings with congenital limb issues and who had been told to euthanize, and who, if I was willing, might be open to letting their animals be the second, third, fourth, and fifth fittings of Daniel's brace. The third was Dr. Teo Park, who, after the 6th successful fitting in the first 6 months of 2018, sat me down at the Whitford's kitchen table and told me that what I had on my hands was not a prototype that helped Juniper. What I had on my hands, he said, was a generation of adjustable equine orthopedic devices that had no commercial equivalent in the United States and that a small focused company could, with the right patent counsel and the right manufacturing partner, build into a real business. I had a community college degree in agricultural science. I had completed at 19. Just before I had married Daniel, I did not know the first thing about patents, or about manufacturing partners, or about the FDA's veterinary device clearance process. Theo Park introduced me to a veterinary device patent attorney in Minneapolis named Mr. Place Halvor Lindgren. Walton, in the second year, mortgaged a corner of Whitford Springs' back 40 against a small startup loan so I could pay the patent attorney's retainer. I paid the loan back in 22 months. I named the company Hale Equine Therapeutics, LLC. I registered it in Daniel's name and mine. I worked 65-hour weeks for the next 6 years out of the small room above the stables, while Walton and Ruth, in the years they had remaining, did the absolute most precious work that anyone has ever done for me. They raised my children alongside me. They taught Caleb to ride. They taught Hannah to muck a stall. They took the twins to the regional 4-H show every June. They made cinnamon rolls every Sunday. They told the twins, every single night before bed, that their father had been a man who had built a brace for a filly named Juniper, and that their father had loved them, and that their father would have wanted them to grow up gentle. Walton died in March of the 6th year. He was 73. He died at home in the kitchen, with a cup of coffee in his right hand, on a Tuesday morning, with the Pioneer Press folded open on the table to the sports page. On Evan, Ruth told me, very calmly, when I came in from feeding the horses, that he had asked her to bring him a fresh cup, and she had brought it. And when she had come back 2 minutes later, he had been gone. He had been ready. He had told her in February, after his cardiologist's last appointment, that he had felt the heart slowing. He had asked her to be ready. She had been ready. He had been buried in the small cemetery behind the Lutheran church in Cottage Grove on a Friday. 3 days later, the twins had stood between Ruth and me at the graveside. Hannah, 8 years old, had held Ruth's hand the whole service. Caleb, 8 years old, had held mine. Ruth died 11 months later. In February of the 7th year, in her sleep in the same bedroom she had slept in for 44 years. With her husband's flannel shirt folded on the pillow beside her, where she had been keeping it since the morning he had not come back to his coffee. She left the entirety of Whitford Springs Equine Ranch to me in her will. She had updated the will 18 months before she died. Her attorney had told her she should not. She had told him, in writing, Madison Hale has been my daughter for 6 years. I have no other heir. This is not generosity. This is accurate accounting. I closed Whitford Springs for the month of February to grieve. Then I went back to work. By the 8th year, the year I turned 29, Hale Equine Therapeutics, LLC held 7 approved veterinary device patents in the United States and 3 in Canada. The company employed 17 people, 11 of them in a small, purpose-built workshop on the back 40 of Whitford Springs, where Walton's old hay barn had been converted into a manufacturing space in the 3rd year. The company had supply contracts with 38 equine veterinary clinics across the upper Midwest, 2 contracts with veterinary schools, Colorado State and the University of Minnesota, and a quietly growing line of orthotic devices for small ruminants that had become its own product category. We had been profitable since the end of year 4. In the spring of the 8th year, a corporate development executive from a publicly traded company called EquiMed Industries, the largest privately held equine veterinary products distributor in North America, drove out to Whitford Springs, unannounced on a Tuesday morning in EquiMed Industries, late April. Walked into the manufacturing barn. Watched my 3 lead technicians fit a custom orthotic on a foal from a ranch in Iowa, and asked to be introduced to the founder. I came down from my office. We sat at the same oak kitchen table where I had sat with Walton on my first morning at the ranch 8 years earlier. The executive's name was Mr. Wunnen Tikrasid. Binnetye. He was 42. He laid a single sheet of paper between us. The paper was a one-page, non-binding letter of interest from Equimed Industries to acquire 100% of Hale Equine Therapeutics, LLC for a cash-and-stock package valued at $80 million, with an earn-out structure tied to the next 3 years of revenue performance that could increase the total to 96. The cash portion alone, payable at closing, was $62 million. I read the letter. I read it again. I told Mr. Parry, I would need 3 weeks. He said 3 weeks was reasonable. He left. I called Mr. Halvor Lindgren, my patent attorney, at 4 that afternoon. Halvor laughed for about 11 seconds. Then he stopped. Then he said, Madison, they are not going to walk away. Take 6 weeks. Hire a corporate M&A firm in the cities. I have 3 names. Pick the second one. They do not waste your time. We are going to negotiate. We are going to take this seriously. Daniel would be very proud of you. I cried in my office for about 20 minutes. Then I went back to work. I hired the M&A firm. I negotiated for 5 weeks. The final offer landed at $80 million flat. Cash at close. No earn-out. Equimed had decided they did not want to leave anything contingent. They wanted the patents, the manufacturing footprint, the technician team, and the Hale Equine Therapeutics brand outright. I would stay on as a non-executive advisor for 2 years. I would retain the Whitford Springs property in full. I would retain my brood of 7 horses descended from June. I would retain Juniper, who was now 9 years old and had become the company's quiet mascot. The signing was scheduled for a Saturday in mid-September of the 8th year. The local paper, the Washington County Gazette, picked up the story 2 weeks before the signing. The headline read, Local Equine Therapeutics Company founded by widow sells for $80 million to national distributor. The article was a small profile, 3 columns, with a photograph of me standing in the paddock with Juniper. The article ran on a Wednesday. By Friday morning, a letter from my mother had arrived at the ranch. It was 4 pages long. It was handwritten on the soft cream stationery she had been using for 30 years. The opening sentence read, Madison, sweetheart, I have been thinking about you for 8 years. The letter went on for 4 pages about the sacred bond between a mother and a daughter, about how she had cried herself to sleep many nights, wondering if you and the babies were warm, about how my father was not the same man he had been and had softened in his old age, and about how Keith had grown up so much in the past few years. The letter closed with the line, Please let us be part of this beautiful next chapter of your life. We are still your family. Family takes care of family. On Saturday afternoon, 2 days after the letter arrived, my older brother Keith pulled into the gravel drive at Whitford Springs in a leased 2024 BMW X5. He had not called. He had not texted. He walked into the kitchen of my farmhouse, the same farmhouse Ruth had welcomed me into at 2 a.m. 8 years earlier, and he poured himself a cup of coffee from my pot. He said, Mats, you look great. Listen, I have got an investment opportunity I need to walk you through. There is a redevelopment play in St. Cloud that is going to be huge. I just need a bridge for the entitlement phase. $3.2 million. You will quadruple it in 18 months. I let him talk. I made notes on the back of a Costco receipt. Then I told him I would consider it. I would not consider it. I called my mother that evening. I told her I had received her letter. I told her I wanted to meet in person to talk about the future. I told her there would be a signing ceremony at Whitford Springs on the 3rd Saturday of September, the day of the Equimed close, and that I would like her and my father and Keith and my younger sister Hadley to come. I told her there would be 300 people there, neighbors, business partners, attorneys, the Equimed team. I told her I wanted the family to be there. I told her there would be an announcement about the distribution of the proceeds. I let the word distribution hang in the air. My mother breathed in audibly. Her voice, when it came back on the line, was warm as fresh banana bread. Madison, sweetheart, of course we will come. Of course. Your father and I are so proud of you. We will be there. I told her I would have name cards reserved at the front row. I hung up. Halvor Lindgren had been on the call with me, on his own line. I had texted him before I dialed her. He had asked to listen. After I hung up with her, he came back on. He said, Madison, are you sure you want them there? I said. Halvor, I want them in the front row. I want every neighbor in this county who watched what they did to me 8 years ago, and every neighbor who watched what Walton and Ruth did instead, to see what 8 years looks like. I want my mother to wear her good cardigan. I want my brother to wear his leased BMW into the driveway. I want my father to sit silent for the last time. And I want every dollar of the $80 million to be accounted for in front of 300 witnesses by the time my mother stands up to applaud the bonus check she has been imagining for 2 weeks. Halvor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Madison, Walton would be so proud of you. We are going to draw up the distribution documents this week. The signing is in 11 days. We will be ready. I hung up the phone. I walked out to the paddock. Juniper was at the fence. The setting Minnesota sun was on her right hindquarter, the one Daniel's brace had saved. The atrophy was gone. The muscle was the equal of her left. She nuzzled my forearm. I told her, very quietly, 11 days. Girl, Daddy would be so proud. The morning of the signing was a Saturday in mid-September. The temperature was 61 degrees. The Minnesota sky over Whitford Springs was the kind of clean, cold blue that only comes in the second week of September. After the first frost has cleared the haze of late summer, the grounds team I had hired from the local rental company had set up 300 white folding chairs on the lawn under the 130-year-old white oak in front of the farmhouse. Arranged in a wide arc around a small raised wooden platform with a podium, a long mahogany signing table, and 3 high-backed chairs facing the audience. Juniper was in the paddock that bordered the lawn on the south side. 10 yards from the back row of chairs, Walton had built that paddock in 1981. Juniper had been grazing in it since 7 that morning. My twins, Caleb and Hannah, both 9 years old, were dressed in matching navy. Hannah had braided her hair the way Ruth had taught her. Caleb had asked me, the night before, if he could wear Walton's old wool cap during the ceremony, which I had said yes to. The cap was too big for him. He had used a small piece of folded paper to take up the gap behind his ear. He looked exactly like a 9-year-old farmer. The guests began arriving at 11:15 for the noon ceremony. 304 people had RSVP'd. 301 came. Bennett Yee from Equimed Industries arrived at 11:41 in a chartered van with his 5-person closing team and a notary public from St. Paul. Halvor Lindgren, my patent attorney, arrived at 11:44 with a corporate M&A partner from his firm named Ms. Imani Calloway, the daughter of the same Iris Calloway, who would one day matter to a girl named Nicole, a small coincidence I would only learn about 3 years later. But a coincidence that matters to me even now. Because of how small Minnesota becomes when you let it. The county sheriff, the same office that had knocked on my cottage door in Maple Plain 8 years earlier, sent a community liaison deputy named Sergeant Park to provide informal security at no charge. Because Walton had been on the volunteer search and rescue roster for 16 years, and Sergeant Park had told me, when I had called to ask, that the department considered it a privilege. The local Washington County Gazette sent a photographer and a reporter. The Pioneer Press sent a stringer. A regional public radio station from St. Paul sent a producer with a microphone. Teo Park, my equine veterinarian, was in the third row with his wife. The four families whose foals had been the second, third, fourth, and fifth fittings of Daniel's brace in 2018 were in the third and fourth rows together. 12 of my 17 employees were in the fifth row. The 5 remaining employees were back at the manufacturing barn, finishing a custom orthotic that could not wait for a Saturday off. Ruth's Lutheran pastor was in the 7th row. My mother arrived at 11:53 a.m. She drove herself. My father, my brother Keith, and my younger sister Hadley up the gravel drive in her 2019 Buick Enclave. She was wearing a pale blue silk dress I did not recognize, and the small string of pearls she only wore for serious occasions. My father was wearing the same navy blazer he had worn the night he had not turned away from the Vikings game 8 years before. Keith was wearing a charcoal suit. Hadley, who had not been in Eden Prairie on the night of the porch, and who had only learned about the porch 18 months later in a phone call with our Aunt Patricia, was wearing a simple black dress and carrying a small bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums she had picked up at a grocery store in St. Paul on the drive up. She had texted me 4 days before the ceremony, separately, and asked if she could bring the flowers. I had told her yes. I had told her she could sit in the second row with our Aunt Patricia, who had also been invited. The rest of the family sat in the front row, where the name cards I had personally written had been placed on the seats. My mother's name card was on the second chair from the aisle. She picked it up. She read her own name. She smiled at it. She slid it into the small clutch purse she had been holding. My mother had brought a large designer handbag I had never seen. It was the kind of bag a woman brings to a ceremony when she expects to leave with paperwork in it. Keith leaned over to the man sitting beside him, a neighboring rancher named Mr. Olaf Sorensen, whose foal had been the 4th fitting of Daniel's brace in the summer of 2018, and said, loud enough for the 3rd row to hear, "That is my baby sister up there. Blood is blood." Right. Crazy. What a good family will do for you when the chips are down. Mr. Sorensen did not respond. Mr. Sorensen had been at Walton's funeral. Mr. Sorensen knew exactly which family had done what, for whom. The ceremony began at 12:04. Halvor Lindgren opened with 3 minutes of welcome remarks and a short procedural framing of the day. Bennett Yee from Equimed delivered 6 minutes of remarks on the acquisition and on the company's commitment to maintaining the Hale Equine Therapeutics brand under the new structure. Teo Park, my veterinarian, delivered 4 minutes of remarks on what Daniel's original brace had meant to the equine therapeutic community in the upper Midwest. Then Halvor returned to the podium, looked out at the audience, and said, "It is now my honor to introduce the founder, the owner, the chief steward, and the person without whom none of us would be here today, Mrs. Madison Hale." I stood up from one of the 3 high-back chairs on the platform. I walked to the podium. I set down a small folded sheet of paper. I adjusted the microphone the half-inch downward I had practiced. I looked out at 301 human beings. I let my eyes settle on the front row. My mother was sitting forward in her chair with her hands clasped in her lap. The pearls caught the September light. She was smiling the small, expectant smile. She had been smiling since I was 3 years old, when she had been about to receive something. I let her smile sit. I unfolded the paper. I did not read from it. I had written the speech 4 times. I knew it. 8 years ago, I said, in late October of 2017, on a Tuesday night, 4 days after my husband Daniel had been killed in a tractor rollover at the farm where we lived, I drove 43 miles in a sleet storm with my 1-year-old twins asleep in the back seat of a 2008 Honda Odyssey. And I stood on a front porch in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and I rang the doorbell of the house I had grown up in. I had $41 in my pocket. I had no place to spend the night. The audience went still. I did not ask for money. I said, I did not ask for a loan. I did not ask for help with the twins. I asked, in 7 sentences, if I could sleep on the den couch for 3 weeks until my husband's small life insurance check landed. I was 21 years old. The woman who opened the door, and who is sitting in the second chair from the aisle in the front row of this audience today, wearing a pale blue silk dress and a string of pearls, said no. She said, and I am quoting, I have done my raising. Madison, you chose this life. Do not bring this to my door. My older brother, who is sitting beside her in a charcoal suit today, said, you always were dramatic. Matt, you'll figure it out. My father, who is sitting on her other side in the same navy blazer he wore that night, said nothing at all. He never turned away from the television. The porch light, on a motion sensor timer my father had installed in 2014, clicked off as I walked back to my car. The audience had stopped moving. My mother's small, expectant smile had not fallen yet. It had begun to harden at the corners. I drove 63 miles farther north that night. I said, because there was a small business card in the glove compartment of the Odyssey from a man my late husband had once helped. On a January night in 2015, deliver a high-risk foal in a blizzard. The man's name was Walton Whitford. He and his wife Ruth were sitting on the porch of the farmhouse you are standing in front of today. In the brown wool coats they had not bothered to take off. At 1:57 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in late October of 2017. Waiting for me. They had been waiting for 33 months. Because Ruth Whitford had told her husband every year since the blizzard that the Hale boy is going to need us one day. Walton and Ruth Whitford, in the brown wool coats, on this porch, were the first 2 adults in my 21 years on this earth to use the words welcome home to me without conditions. They took my children inside. They put my 1-year-old daughter to sleep in a crib they had been keeping in storage since 1979. The year their own first son was born and did not live, they gave me a room above the stables. And they did not ask me for anything for it. They became my children's family for the next 8 years. I paused. I looked at the second row, where Hadley was sitting with Aunt Patricia. Hadley was crying. Aunt Patricia had her hand on Hadley's wrist. Walton Whitford, I said, died at his kitchen table in March of last year. Ruth Whitford died in her sleep 11 months later. They left me this ranch in their joint will. They had no other heirs. Ruth's attorney told her not to update the will. Ruth told him, in writing, Madison Hale has been my daughter for 6 years. This is not generosity. This is accurate accounting. I have spent the last 8 years building a company out of a brace that my late husband Daniel had designed for a foal named Juniper, who is grazing in the paddock. You can see over the back row of chairs to the south. That company has been acquired today by Equimed Industries for $80 million. I am now going to tell you what I am doing with those $80 million. Mr. Lindgren and Miss Calloway have the executed paperwork on the signing table behind me. I turned slightly to the table. Halvor laid 4 separate stapled documents on it. He laid them face up, so the audience could see the embossed law firm seals. I turned back to the audience. $56 million, I said, is moving today, by wire transfer that has already been initiated, into a 501c3 public charity called the Walton and Ruth Whitford Foundation. The foundation will operate from a small office attached to this farmhouse, under a board that I will chair, and that includes Theo Park, Halvor Lindgren, my pastor, and a former Walton Whitford colleague from his volunteer search and rescue years. The foundation will do 2 things. It will build and operate, within 3 years, a free large animal veterinary clinic for the working farms of the upper Midwest whose owners cannot afford the kind of specialty care that saved Juniper. and it will administer an emergency support program for young widows in this region who are raising children alone. Modelet. Very specifically, on the room above the stables that Walton and Ruth gave to me at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in October of 2017. A sound came from the front row. My mother's hands had come unclasped. $16 million, I said, is moving today, by wire transfer that has already been initiated, into an irrevocable spendthrift trust for my twins, Caleb and Hannah, locked until each of them turns 25. The trust pays out for education and the basic costs of becoming an adult and is otherwise inaccessible to anyone, including to me. The trustee is Halvor Lindgren. The successor trustees, in order, are Ms. Calloway, Sergeant Park, and my younger sister Hadley, who is sitting in the second row in a black dress. Hadley is the only member of my family of origin who is on any document I have signed in the last 8 years. And she is on a document because she texted me 4 days ago to ask whether she could come. And she brought yellow chrysanthemums. Hadley was openly crying. $8 million, I said, is moving today, by individual checks that have already been cut, into the accounts of 23 small family-owned farms within 40 miles of this ranch that have been carrying agricultural loans they have not been able to service for the last 2 years of regional drought and rising input costs. The bank lien on every one of those 23 farms will be released by Monday afternoon. None of those 23 farmers knew I was going to do this until Halvor Lindgren placed the cashier's checks into the hands of each of their attorneys at 9 this morning. Several of those farmers are sitting in this audience right now. I would like them to stay seated. I would like them to know that what I have just done for them is what Walton Whitford would have done if he had ever had the money to do it. And that I am only the courier. A man in the 7th row took off his cap and lowered his head. Another man, 2 rows behind him, did the same. $80 million, I said, has been accounted for. The total cash and stock proceeds of the acquisition, 56 plus 16 plus 8 equals 80. There is no balance. There is no reserve. I have retained, from the proceeds, exactly $0. I will continue to draw a non-executive advisor's salary from Equimed for the next 2 years, which is reasonable for the work I will continue to do. I will continue to live in the farmhouse Ruth Whitford left me. I will continue to raise my twins under the white oak tree behind me. I do not need any more money than that. And I am suspicious of anyone who would tell me I do. I turned my head 1 degree to the front row. I have one more thing to say to the family of origin sitting in the front row of this audience. I sent you a letter, and I made a phone call. After I received the letter you sent me 8 days ago. Because I wanted you to come today. I wanted you to come because I wanted you to hear, in front of 300 witnesses, where the $80 million went. I wanted you to hear so that the next time my mother tells the women at her Bible study at Eden Prairie Presbyterian that Madison turned her back on her family, there will be 300 people in this county who can correct the record. I wanted you to know that the money is gone, that none of it was ever yours, and that I am, finally, after 8 years, returning your message from a porch in October of 2017. I looked at my mother. My mother's face had gone the color of the back of a check. "Mum," I said, "you told me, on a porch in Eden Prairie, that you were done raising me. I want you to know, in front of 300 witnesses today, that I am, as of this morning, done raising you. The $80 million is accounted for. There is nothing left in the well. You are welcome to drive home now." My mother stood up. She did not stand up gracefully. She knocked her own clutch purse off her lap onto the grass. The name card slid out of it and lay face up. "You, ungrateful little," she started, in a voice that was not the voice she had been using for the audience. Sergeant Park, the community liaison deputy, stepped forward from the side of the platform. He did not touch her. He held up one open palm. He said, very mildly, Mrs. Sinclair, please take your seat or step to the side. Mrs. Hale has the floor. My mother sat down. My father had not moved. He had not spoken in 8 years, and he was not going to start tea. Keith, beside my mother, stood up. He grabbed the back of her chair. He said, loudly, this is a setup. This is a stunt. You set us up. You made us drive up here to humiliate us in front of these people. You sick. Sergeant Park took one more step forward. He looked at Keith. Keith stopped talking. Keith sat back down. I turned away from the front row. I walked the 4 steps to the mahogany signing table. I sat down in the center high-back chair. Halver handed me the first pen. I signed the acquisition document. Bennett Yee from Equimed signed beside me. Ms. Calloway notarized. The 4 documents took 11 minutes to fully execute. The audience watched in something close to a silence. When the last document was signed, Halvor stood, returned to the podium, and said, this concludes the formal portion of the ceremony. There is iced tea and lemonade and lemon bars, Mrs. Lees. Hale's neighbor made under the white tent to the east. Please stay. Please enjoy the afternoon. Thank you for coming. The audience rose. The audience clapped. The applause went on for 2 minutes and 4 seconds. I have the recording. I have watched it once. My mother, my father, and my brother Keith left at 12:47 p.m. They did not stay for the lemon bars. My mother did not pick up her name card from the grass. Hadley stayed. Hadley sat with the twins in the white tent for 2 hours. Hadley has come back to Whitford Springs every other weekend since. She does not bring chrysanthemums anymore. She brings a bag of groceries and a willingness to help muck the stalls. I am still figuring out what to do with my younger sister. She did not stand on the porch with my mother in 2017. And she has been writing me apology letters for a sister she only saw once a year for the first 6 years of my life at Whitford Springs because she had been afraid of our mother. I am reading her letters slowly. We will see. Here is how it settled. Because I know you want to know. Keith filed for personal bankruptcy in February of this year. 6 months after the ceremony. The St. Cloud redevelopment had collapsed 2 weeks before the ceremony, which I had not known but had suspected. Without the bridge for the entitlement phase he had been counting on, his investors had called the loans. He moved out of my parents' basement bedroom and into a small rental in a not very nice part of Brooklyn Park. He has not contacted me. I do not expect him to. My mother stopped attending Bible study at Eden Prairie Presbyterian 3 weeks after the ceremony. The church secretary told my Aunt Patricia, who told Hadley, who told me, that my mother had told the pastor she needed time away. Time away, in my mother's vocabulary, has historically meant people are saying things about me that I am not ready to face. I do not feel anything about it. I do not feel anything about her. In either direction. The Walton and Ruth Whitford Foundation broke ground on the free large animal clinic in May. The clinic will open next spring. The widow support program, which we have named, with Hadley's quiet suggestion, the room above the stables placed its first widow and her 2 children with a host ranch in Dakota County last month. She is 23. She is doing fine. Caleb is in 4th grade. He wants to be a large animal veterinarian. Theo Park lets him assist on simple farm calls every other Saturday. Hannah is in 4th grade. She wants to run the foundation when she is older. She has been sitting in on board meetings since she was 8. Taking notes in a small spiral-bound notebook the way Ruth used to. Juniper is Nina. She is in foal for the first time this winter. By a stallion from a farm in Iowa that I selected very carefully on the recommendation of one of the 4 families whose foals were the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th fittings of Daniel's brace. The foal will be born in April. If it is a colt, I will name it Walton. If it is a filly, I will name her Ruth. The room above the stables is still there. I have not changed it. The 2 cribs are gone. Ruth and I dismantled them in year 3. When the twins moved into bedrooms in the farmhouse, but the bed is the same. The quilt is the same. The window over the paddock is the same. The room is the first room a new widow stays in when the foundation places one with us. We have hosted 3 so far. They have all been 21. They have all walked up to the bedroom door at the top of the stable stairs and stopped the way I stopped at 159 a.m. in October of 2017. Ruth's quilt is the first thing they see when I open the door. If there is one thing I learned from a porch in Eden Prairie, a 43-mile sleet drive with 2 one-year-olds in the back seat, 8 years of building a company from a brace my husband never lived to bring to market, and a wooden podium under a white oak on a Saturday in mid-September. It is this: the family you were born into is not always the family you end up with. The people who measure their love in ledger entries are not the people who will be at the door at 1:57 in the morning on the worst week of your life. And the most powerful thing you can do, when the people who were supposed to keep you alive decide they cannot afford to, is to find the strangers who can, and to let those strangers stay long enough to become the only family that counts. That is my story. A porch, a brace, a foal named Juniper, a couple in brown wool coats waiting at 1:57 in the morning, and an oak tree under which $80 million was distributed without my mother receiving a single penny. If this reminded you to thank the stranger who opened the door when family closed one, take that as your sign. Do not wait for the acquisition. Do not wait for the $80 million. Do not wait for the ceremony in front of 300 witnesses. Call the person who waited up for you in a brown wool coat. Tell them you remember the welcome home. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me the name of the stranger who became your family when family stopped being family. I read every one. From a small farmhouse at the end of a gravel drive in Cottage Grove, Minnesota, with my twins doing their homework at the oak kitchen table and a foal named Juniper grazing in the paddock, I am Madison Hale. And the only thing I ever needed, in the end, was the older man in a wool cap who walked across his own gravel driveway at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in late October of 2017, took off his cap, looked at me, and said, "Mrs. Hale, Daniel was a good man. We have been waiting for you. Come inside." Daughter, a brace is not meant to erase the injury. It is meant to hold what is wounded long enough for strength to return. That was what Daniel built for Juniper. And without knowing it, that was what Walton and Ruth became for me. They did not ask me to prove I deserved shelter. They did not turn my grief into a bill or my children into an inconvenience. They simply made room. And in that room, a broken life learned how to stand again. The room above the stables taught me that rescue does not always arrive as money. Sometimes it arrives as a porch light left on, a kettle warming in the kitchen, 2 clean cribs, and someone saying, "Come inside," when everyone else has decided you are too heavy to carry. Real generosity does not make a speech about sacrifice. It quietly builds a place where the next frightened person can breathe. That is why the $80 million could not become revenge money. It had to become open doors, healed animals, protected children, and rooms waiting for someone else who has nowhere to go. Author Nguyen Van Chien.